Good morning.
Good morning.
Great thanks to everyone who helped out to make the celebrations last weekend work, and everyone who was able to attend. And if you weren't, I'm sure there'll be some kind of electronic manifestation of those available for you to look at some point. I would like to speak this morning about O-Segaki, or the offerings to the hungry ghosts, which we will practice together next week. We take up this practice at Buddha Ai Temple in the Sunday that's closest to Halloween every year. And this year it will actually be on Halloween, so that's kind of special. And these practices typically in Japan and in China, Korea, are done in the summertime, and they're associated with the various rites that happen around the period of Obon, which is a very kind of a spiritually pregnant part of the year for people in East Asia, usually happening in the beginning of July or the beginning of August, depending on the area that you're in. In East Asia, that's a time where people feel that the line between this world and the other worlds is thin. So for us, July and August is usually barbecues and fireworks, and actually the boundary between this world and other worlds is always pretty thin. But maybe we come to recognize it according to the conditions of the time and place that we are. And so for us, I think that Halloween or the autumn time feels much more that way. And so that's why we celebrate or do these practices now. Segaki is these offerings to the hungry ghosts is based on a sutra called the Blazing Mouth Sutra. And in this sutra is a story of one of the Buddha's closest disciples, Ananda, who was the Buddha's attendant for many, many, many years up until his death. And it says in this sutra that while in retreat, one evening, Ananda, while he was in deep meditation, that he was visited by a demonic being. And this demonic being's name is Enku, or Blazing Mouth. Thus the name of the sutra, Blazing Mouth Sutra. And he asks this Blazing Mouth, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm the king of the hungry ghosts. I am the leader of this world of the hungry ghosts," which is one of the realms in Buddhism. Buddhism talks about 6 different realms. The human realm is one of them. The realm of the divine beings is another. The realm of angry gods is another, or titans. The animal realm, the hell realm, and then the realm of hungry ghosts. And so Enku says, "I am the leader of this realm, the king of that realm." And he goes on to tell Ananda, he says that you will lose your life in 3 days, and you will fall into the realm of hungry ghosts. And Ananda says, "Why? Why does it have to be that?" He doesn't argue with him. He just asks why. And Enku says, Blazing Mouth says, "It's because of your karma. It can't be avoided." And Ananda says, "There must be some way to overcome this karma." And Enku says, there's one way, but it's impossible. You have to feed not just me. You have to satisfy not just me, the king of the hungry ghosts, but you have to feed every hungry ghost. You have to satiate the appetite of every hungry ghost. And furthermore, you have to feed the assembly of holy ones and all celestial beings. If you do that, then you could overcome this karma. And so the Ananda goes to Buddha, and he says, "I've been visited by this being." And the Buddha says, "Don't worry. That actually that thing that he said that you have to do, you can do it. We can do it. I've learned about what it is to nourish beings. And I learned it from Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of compassion, when I was residing in the divine realm of great contentment. And so the Buddha goes on to teach Ananda about this way of making offerings. And the next day, they enact the Segaki, the feeding of the hungry ghosts, together with the assembly. And Ananda's karma is overcome, and he lives out a long life, continues to be the attendant of the Buddha, and eventually becomes the heir to his Dharma through his Dharma brother Mahakashapa. And the sutra then describes how it is that we can make these offerings. And it has been done that way for 2,500 years throughout India, China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam. I think they have their own versions of this in the old schools, the Theravadan schools in southern Buddhism. I don't know much about that. It's really a beautiful story. It's one of my favorite. And it's one thing for us to receive this kind of a story or this kind of a legend and let it work on us. These are why stories are so important, why legends are so important, why myths are so important. It's not about their objective truth, right? To try to figure out historically what happened there. I happen to believe this event took place in a literal sense, whatever that means. And I believe there was a man named Ananda, and there was a man named Buddha Shakyamuni, and that they met and they worked with this. But their eyes were open in a different way than our eyes tend to be today. They could see beyond the kind of limitations of the human's fleshy eye. And so many of these stories and legends came from their life in a way that sounds very fantastic to us. But if we receive those stories, there can be real implications for how we live and how we conceive of the Bodhisattva path, how we conceive of what it means to walk the path of awakening together with other beings. So when we hear a story like this, some implications, there's many of them, but some that might start popping out to you are things like thorough practice includes meeting difficult karma. Ananda is not just some schmuck. He is held out as the pinnacle of a practitioner that's following the Buddha. He's the closest to the Buddha for year after year after year after year. Right? He doesn't say to Enku, I think you must have the wrong guy. I am Ananda. Surely I couldn't have this karma. Right? Ananda sees Enku and he knows, oh, yeah, something's going on. Right? Well, that's deeply important for us to realize. The more we practice, I'm sorry to say, this is not very good salesmanship, but the more you practice, in many ways, harder your life will get. Harder and easier. Yeah? Harder in the sense that you will meet difficult karma, but easier in the sense that you learn to work with that karma and you learn to liberate and transform it. Right? Where our life is so controlled by difficult karma, but mostly we don't see it. It's like it's just stuck to our back. Like there's this pull that's on our back that's kind of pushing us around, but we don't see it. And so practice is helping us to see it. Being visited by Enku, by Blazing Mouth, is actually a sign of what an important heir to the Buddha's Dharma Ananda is. Right? The fact he can be visited by Enku. Okay, so that's a kind of thing that you might get from the story. It doesn't say in the sutra explicitly, but mostly in the tradition, especially look at the iconography around this, paintings and things that are done around it. There is an understanding that Enku is actually Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, is the Bodhisattva of compassion, showing up to Ananda in this way. So our understanding is that great bodhisattvas can take form in many, many, many different ways. And many ways that Avalokiteshvara can exercise compassion. Sometimes compassion looks very soft and kind of loving, holding a baby. I've been doing a lot of that lately. It's really nice. It's so squishy. You just kind of squish them and they coo and they smile, and it's wonderful. So that's one kind of way of compassion. But there's another kind of way of compassion which is fiery. There's difficult karma here. And so if you look at that iconography, one of the most famous paintings of Enku, he's sitting like a Buddha. It's like a tonka, like these paintings that you would see from Tibetan Vajrayana tradition. And there's a Buddha sitting in the middle and all these beings around them, very colorful. And Enku's there, and his belly is kind of transparent, and you can see all the veins and the energy flowing through him. He's got these wild eyes and this crazy hair. And then up above him is a beautiful painting of Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva. And in iconography, that's a way of telling you who's in the picture. The person in the picture is that, emanation of that being. So how could that be? The Avalokitesvara is showing up to show Enku his difficult karma, and at the same time is the being which taught the Buddha about what it means to feed beings, about what it means to bring about nourishment. Scary messengers are sometimes bodhisattvas. I put sometimes in there on purpose. Okay? Scary messengers sometimes are simply scary messengers. Right? There's another level here. You can't just fix the problem. That's so much part of practice. We come up against something difficult, and normally we're driven to fix the problem, right? Especially we come and we're practicing. It's like, okay, how do I fix this? Enku's showing up to me. What do I do to get over this? And Enku's like, dude, you can't. You're just going to have to suffer the consequences of the karma. Unless you radically change your whole approach. Not just to fix this thing in the way that you think things can be fixed. Hey, Enku, could I throw you a bone here? Could I give you something to eat? Whatever you want. And then you could let me out of this, please? It's like, no, that's not how it goes. Ananda, you have to completely change the way that you see me, the way that you see the world. And if you don't do that, there's no way to feed us. We are an ocean of hungry mouths. The story brings up questions of what does it mean to be fed? What does it mean to be nourished? Can this happen alone? You think about you're hungry and you have an apple and you eat the apple. This is great. It feels good. It tastes good. But when we do that simply as me devouring the apple, there's also a suffering in that. There's an anxiousness. There's a difficulty that's present right there in our own eating because we're cut off. Before we eat at the temple, we always are chanting these different kind of prayers. But this very short one, this is in Japan, before people eat, they always say, "Itadakimasu." I remember our daughter Satsuki, her best friends is a very devout Christian family, and she spent a lot of time at Jessica's house, and they would always pray before they ate. And so one time we were getting ready for dinner, and she said, "Mom, Dad, how come we don't pray before we eat?" And my wife, Azza, said something I never forget, it was so beautiful. She said, "Well, Satsuki, actually we do. We say itadakimasu, which means I will now receive. And then the way that we eat the food is our prayer. The way that we receive is our prayer. We don't thank God. We receive the food as nourishment." Clever mom. Good to be married to a Zen Baldy, I suppose. But this itadakimasu is a very different approach to receiving something than just I am hungry, I need, I get, I devour. This is I receive, and the hunger in my belly and the emergence of nourishment are not separate things. There's a great teacher in in Japan, in the modern day Japan, who started a religious movement called Itoen. And his great enlightenment, it said he was living in a little shrine as a mendicant, and one day he was sitting on the engawa, this kind of porch, covered porch of the shrine, and he heard a baby cry. And he said that as he heard the baby cry, he could feel the milk of the world rising up. And then he knew what his life was to be. And then he left the shrine and he just started working for people. He would go to people's doors. He knocks on the door, and they would say, well, what? And he said, let me be of service to you. Anything, please. He didn't say, I'll help you out. He said, let me be of service to you. It would be a great honor to me if I could serve you in some way, if I could do something for you. And as followers started to follow him, and this movement started to gather, people would go to the doors, and of course you'd be creeped out. Someone comes to your door and they're like, I want to do something for you, you know? And he would train his students. He would say again and again, he would say, if you have any shred in your heart of an expectation that you will receive because of this, they'll smell it and you'll be a weirdo. And then they'll tell you to go away. That it's a discipline of humility to receive the honor to be able to serve another person. That's what he took from that experience, right? And then he lived his life that way. Right? So there's a question in this story. What does it mean to feed? What does it mean to receive? How is it that we're nourished? Generosity is fundamental to the medicine of the Buddha Dharma. It's not a kind of sideshow. It's not something that we do in addition to, or kind of as an obligation on the path. It is the path. You know, my teacher would always say, he said, there's something wrong with Ananda. I knew it, there was something wrong with Ananda. Which I thought wasn't very fair. But is this question, you know, what's in Ananda's karma? What is it that he's grabbing onto? What is it he doesn't know about generosity yet? We can think about that. Ananda is known for being the one who could remember all of the Buddha's teachings. So after the Buddha died, Ananda recited to the assembly of awakened ones. He was not yet awakened. And he recited to the assembly every word that he had heard. A lot of people think of that, oh yeah, it's a mythology. People are always blowing things out of proportion. He had a really good memory or whatever. But actually, there are people like that you can read about. They can remember everything. So Ananda was probably like this. I wonder what holding on to things in that way, what kind of dark side it might have. That's a question. So I invite you in this story to receive the story, to let it settle in you, to let those kind of questions come through you. And for those of you who have heard this story many, many times, because you've been here for many years, you develop this kind of rich relationship with what the story is. And if this is your first time hearing it, you're starting that relationship. And a legend like this, you know, it's very simple. You know, it's not such a complex legend, but it will start to live in you. And these kinds of questions, these kinds of teachings can come out of the story. And then there's the ritual enactment. You know, to receive the legend, to receive the myth, the story, and allow it to work on us and through us is fundamental. And the ritual enactment is also fundamental. The ritual enactment, it helps us to step beyond the limitations of metaphor. And let me talk about that a little bit. We can look at legends and mythology as metaphor, and that's an okay way to receive it. We can learn a lot through seeing this, you know, these stories as a metaphor for things that are happening in our life. But the limitations of metaphor are that we're always taking the story and relating it back to something that we think we know. I think I know what my life is. I think I have a sense of what my karma is, right? I had this difficult experience the other day. That's Enku visiting me. Okay, that's good. But you also get stuck in the idea that you know what's going on, because you have to take this thing from the story. If you're going to hook it to something, the thing you have to hook it to, you have to kind of know what it is you're going to hook it to. Right? And so metaphor becomes a bit limiting in that sense because it's always referenced back to the grasping after my own experience. That ritual can transform not just what we're conceiving, but the way in which we are perceiving. Okay? The way in which we are seeing things is shifted through the enactment of ritual. And then a story is not only something I can look at and relate it to my life, right? But this legend enacted ritually now helps me to see in a different way. And this is why it's always been the case that mythology stays alive through ritual enactment. Without ritual enactment, the mythology quickly slips away. And so a central part of the ritual enactment here is the making of offerings. I mean, that's the central part of the story, right? Is Enklus like, look, if you want to get over this karma, you're going to have to nourish all these beings. You have to make an offering that is impossible to make. I think it's a little weird when you come to a temple probably, and there's like, maybe the candles seem kind of like, okay, I get it, candles, you burn candles. It's kind of churchy, right? You know, and so it's good. But incense, well, smells good. Okay, those are offerings, right? But then you see, oh, apples, and cupcakes. You know, is the Buddha going to reach down there at nighttime and snag one of those cupcakes? You know? He looks kind of woody for that orange frosting. You know? You see in the center of the altar there's a red tray with little bowls on it. Every morning when breakfast is prepared, one person who's here, you know, helping make breakfast and those kinds of things, it shifts around who it is, will put offerings of what it is that we're eating for breakfast, usually oatmeal, and then put it there on the altar and serve the Buddha tea and sweet water. There's flowers. So we're making offerings all the time. We do that at the temple. You might do that at your altar. You have an altar to make offerings. We might come across a shrine or a stupa and do that. We might make offerings at a tree. Oftentimes when I'm in the woods, I will carry a little tobacco with me because I like tobacco, but also because this is a thing that we can offer to the trees, to the river, or a bit of food. So it's not something that's just limited to practice of an altar at a temple. Really, that altar of offering is everywhere. For us to find a way to enact that, to enact the altar of our life, is not a metaphor, right? I mean, you can make it into a metaphor, but what I'm saying is it's an actuality. Where do I make those offerings? You know, on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, yearly basis, spontaneously. Where do I offer? How do I offer? This is one of the big teachings of Buddhism, of the Buddha Dharma. You know, when we're making ritual offerings, it's teaching us something about how we're placing our attention. You take something which is nourishing to you, right? The fragrance of the incense. Where do you place it? When you just consume it, you know, I like how this smells. That's great. But it all goes right here into the grasping onto my own experience. And when you make an offering, you're extending your attention. Your attention is going to a doorway that you can't quite see through. There's a gateway beyond the jail cell of yourself. And generosity is enacted in this very simple way. Very straightforward. The way you see changes. because you make that offering. And as we enact that ritually, we find that in our life, that we start learning about generosity. Not only as something that I give to another being, because other beings also need things and I'm kind, but because that doorway is a doorway that helps us see through to a world in which me and you are not dividable. And that generosity is simply the enactment of life. Is to be alive, is to be generous, is to receive the generosity of other beings and to give the generosity of my being. So, offering is very simple. You know, one of the weaknesses of a rich tradition is that, you know, you come in, there's a very developed way to do it. And then you think, oh, if I'm going to do it right, it should be like that. But actually, it's just like the more people we have and the more minds and the more time has been going into it, the more we can refine our understanding about what's happening through that ritual practice, and we can really learn something through the depth of the tradition as it's come to us. But also just to enact it, you know, walking in the woods, to take out the little bit of your, what's that stuff people love? When you're hiking, it's got nuts and stuff in it. Trail mix, yeah. Trail mix. I gotta love your trail mix, especially if it has those chocolate pieces in it, you know. And you take a little bit out, and then you put it there in the nook of a tree. Maybe you feed a squirrel or something. That's great, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something different. I'm not saying, oh, there's a squirrel, I'll give this to the squirrel. That's also wonderful. You can make an offering there. But I'm talking, you just place it into the spaciousness of this place that you know is beyond feeding or not feeding. There's a doorway where an offering can be made. To practice like that, to come back to this ritual every year and to enact it together, it's my great hope that that's a support to you in having the kind of courage to do something a little weird, right? And then find out how it's not very weird. Actually, it's a very natural thing, which humans have been doing since before the time of the Buddha. Now, the way that we do this in a kind of the very formal sense of the way that the tradition has brought this ritual work down to us, then we can start studying it. And we can see, like, okay, what does it have to teach me about what this offering is? And so I'll point out a couple things that you can look at. One of the things is pay attention to how the ritual is constantly mirroring. Okay? So on the altar in front of the Buddha, there's this round mirror, small round mirror. It's kind of cool. I think it is. Every time I walk in, I see the mirror. I kind of like, what's happening with that? What is that cry of the baby and the swelling of the milk? What is that Enku appearing before Ananda, and Ananda knowing that this is his karma appearing to him? What is the Ananda going to the Buddha and the Buddha and Ananda seeing each other? And the Buddha inviting Ananda to see the world in the way that he sees the world. And then the two of them and the assembly coming forward and facing that host, that great assembly of hungry ghosts. The assembly of the Buddha and his followers, all shapes and sizes. Right? And this massive, uncountable assembly of hungry ghosts meeting each other. What is that mirroring? We enact that ritually. So there's a mirror on the altar here, but what will happen at next week's O-Segaki is there'll first be offerings made to the Buddha, incense, prostrations, chanting, and those kind of things. And then the doshi, the teacher of the ritual, which will be me, I'll turn and face that direction. And the ryoban, the people in the front rows here on either side will turn, right? And that's a symbol that the whole assembly is turning. It's a little hard for everyone to turn, so we don't turn the whole assembly. But actually the whole assembly is turning, right? We are now all seeing through the eyes of the Buddha. The Buddha has invited us to be the representatives of the Buddha Dharma, because that's the way the offering from the Buddha to these hungry beings can go beyond the limited mind that these hungry ghosts have about what nourishment is. That's their whole problem, is that actually understanding the realm of the hungry ghosts, there's all kinds of food in the realm of the hungry ghosts. But the problem is when the hungry ghosts pick it up and they try to put it in their mouths, it turns into fire. It turns into pus, it turns into blood. That's what the sutras tell us. Right? So Enku, fire mouth, is fire mouth, not because he's in a realm where there's no nourishment. He just doesn't know how to get it, because he thinks that he has to take something from the outside and shove it inside. He's caught in the inside and outside mind. He doesn't realize that the apple and my own hunger arise together, and that that's where nourishment comes from, is that mutuality. But the Buddha understands that, and the Buddha invites us to enact that, even when we don't understand it. Even when we don't understand it completely, we can look through that doorway. We can look through the eyes of the Buddha at that host of beings. And so we do that. We do that together. And then everyone comes forward and offers incense. And there's a special altar that gathers all those beings together. So just if you haven't been to one, please come next week. It's quite fun, but also deep. Right? The two are possible to coexist. This mirroring is a deep teaching, a deep story about inner penetration. That any two beings are both exactly ourselves. Like Enku is exactly Enku, Ananda is exactly Ananda. That's it. But that they're also completely connected. This is a fundamental teaching of the Buddha Dharma. And our ignorance gets us trapped on one side or the other. We think like, oh, I have to kill myself to make room for everything else. Or I have to assert myself to make everything happen. And this is where all of our karma comes from, is those two basic misunderstandings. So this mirroring is a deep teaching about the inner penetration. It's a deep teaching about how it is that we can even see each other. It's something we come across every day, again and again and again. When you open your eyes, you're in a mirror. When you hear, you're in a mirror. When you touch, when you taste, when you smell, we grab onto it as experience and we say, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's my experience, it's my experience, it's my experience. But actually, it's a mirror facing a mirror, a Buddha facing a Buddha. So that's an example of something that is inside of the ritual. And we're actually doing something, we're ritually doing something, which then can teach us about what's happening there in the mirror. That's just one example. The ritual is chocked full of these kinds of things. The words that we chant, there's a whole slew of dharanis, which are like incantations, short incantations, and they all have a specific meaning. I've been studying for about 20 years, and then I go back and I look at the sutra, and then I look at those incantations. I was like, oh, that's what this one means. Or it would be better to say, this one also has this meaning. It's not a stopping place. It's like an excitement, because it guides you another step. And then, but if I stop there, if I'm like, oh, I'm becoming very expert at this ritual, that's not the point. The point is, how does that live in me? How does it live through me? How does it change the way that I see? And so I mean this as a kind of invitation to study, to ask questions and to engage the ritual with both the vigor of letting the story into our heart and minds, but then also letting it into our body in the way that we practice together. Are there any questions? Mm-hmm.
I've been struck this year by my kind of great excitement for the ritual that usually I haven't felt, but I've been sort of reflecting that it's like Christmas, Halloween, and Thanksgiving, a little bit all in one. all those energies, and reflecting on I don't know, those sentiments that I think we really love and actualize through like the various traditions we have, that being like, oh, maybe it is doing that. It is carrying all those qualities, and it is a lens for the kind of I'm trying to invite into my whole life all the time, like that bounty and generosity and realms beyond this one. And I've been struck at just like, oh yeah, like I think within our culture, I think we appreciate those holidays for those reasons, but I've tended to let those stop there rather than being like, I don't know, a kid in the neighborhood who loves Halloween, and rather than like thinking like, oh yeah, you get to do these things then. It's like, oh, those are eyes you love for a reason, and you can, we can be moving towards those all the time. So I think for more than I've ever felt before, it's kind of like we were just talking about this, a race car track, and getting like a umph, like, and then we speed up through the track, and realizing that this is an invitation of one time through the year that actually we're returning to that deep excitement and joy all the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the point of regular ritual. That we have a calendar of ritual practices that we do, because like if we take the Segaki, for example, here at the temple, actually we do that ceremony every day in a abbreviated form, and then on the month of October we do it in a not abbreviated form, but without as much fanfare every day for the month of October. And then on the Segaki day, then we do it on that day with the Sunday assembly. And so all of those are important. But whether we are doing that ritual every day or not isn't the point exactly. But are we seeing in that way that the ritual helps us to see? Are we keeping that going or not? So oftentimes I think about a holiday like Christmas, which is so easy to dislike. And for all kind of reasons, we could be kind of what's the green guy? Grinch. Yeah, we could be Grinchy. We could be Grinchy about that. But I just love Christmas, and the thing I love about it is exactly the thing you're saying. Is like there's just this shift in many people's hearts, not all people's hearts. The family I grew up in, my family of origin, that was a time where there was a certain value we had that was really placed, and then we were asked to see in a certain way, and we'd go to mass on the night before, because then you don't have to go the morning of Christmas. Plus midnight mass was beautiful, and I'm really thankful for that, because it gave this way of seeing. And I know that it's, that some people really, especially growing up in families that didn't celebrate Christmas, weren't from that religious tradition. There's a lot of pain around that. I understand that. I don't mean to minimize that, but that there was this kind of this other quality. And so that's true in Segaki, when you hear, there's these big cymbals, cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha, and the drum, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. Those kind of energetic things are made to wake up our body and mind so that doorway that I'm talking about doesn't close. Because we close that doorway so easily as we objectify ourselves in the world. It just shuts like that. I mean, it actually doesn't shut. It can't shut. There's no door on it. But we think it shuts. And that's kind of like it shutting. We don't see through it. And so I think that the kind of regularity. And then I would invite people, when you feel inspired by something, it's the same thing like with meditation. Oftentimes, if we're teaching about, we say, well, it's best if you can meditate every day. But that's not because you're going to accumulate time in meditating. It's not the point to get more time accumulated of meditating. My friend had this game on the internet. This was earlier. It's so hilarious. It was this meditation game, the Zazen game, and you sit and you stare at the screen, and at random times, like an A or a question mark or something will come, and then you have to press the button within a certain number of seconds, and then it logs how much time you've been staring at the screen, and they called it like competitive meditation or something. And people would have hours and hours and hours on there, And the thing I thought was so hilarious was like, really, the fact that someone made it is kind of hilarious. The fact that people did it even seemed like more hilarious. But that's. The reason that they're so funny is that's actually kind of our mindset about meditation often. We kind of think somewhere in our head we're running that program, like how much am I meditating, or not meditating is even maybe the bigger trip that we get on. But the reason that we talk about daily meditation is just like, recognize that there's a doorway. You don't accumulate more doorway, right? Like there's no way to add up the doorway. It's just doorway, right? And are you gonna look through it or not? Are you gonna walk through it or not? And so we emphasize the daily aspect of that, because to do it daily, it's just like you're saying, it brings that freshness to our day-to-day life. To do it with each breath, to do it once a week, to do it once a month, to do it once a year. All of those are good. I need some pom-poms. Hey.
I appreciate this view of the Sagaki ceremony as from the perspective of generosity, and I'm used to thinking of it as the focus on the hungry ghost, how they can't get nourishment and they just want to consume. And so I'm still kind of working with this idea of, like, it's a totally new shift for me to view it. Can you tell me a little bit more about the view from the hungry ghost?
Yeah. So the view from the hungry ghost side is just what you said. They're insatiable appetite, and they just want to get the thing, and as soon as they get the thing, it turns into something that doesn't nourish them. And there's a quality of greed. Actually, we can see in our life when we act through greed, we're never really satisfied with what it is that we get. We grab onto the thing, and we may accomplish something, or we may get the thing that we wanted, but it doesn't really hit the spot. We still have that kind of anxiousness at the base. And so from the side of the hungry ghost, we think about our own karma, our own hungry ghost karma, the Karnanda had. What is that? And not, I don't mean what is it, like let me explain it so then I could get rid of it, but I mean getting really intimate with it. Where's a place where I'm just doing that? Where are the places that I'm doing that again and again and again and again? Like if I'm a regular meditator, what are my expectations about peaceful mind states? And how do I grab onto peaceful mind states? How do I make them a consumable that's outside of myself? And in what way do I stay off kilter and unsatisfied because the peaceful mind states are something that I think that I can obtain and consume, as opposed to entering the doorway through non-grasping. So we can really become more and more intimate with our own hungry ghost qualities. Then the enacting of the generosity, that's the medicine that the Buddha is offering, and that we enact through the Buddha's teaching they received from Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva to overcome that kind of grasping. What do we do? It has to be a real offering. Like in our ritual, we read in English a short, so like 3 paragraphs before the Dharani start, that was originally written by Soto Zen teacher named Menzan, and is kind of explanation of what's happening in the Segaki rituals. And in there, it says like, okay, here's this food, we're making this offering to you. You now please make an offering. Don't just eat the food yourself. You prepare the food and make an offering. This is one of the reasons that we don't give the offerings that are on the altar that you'll see. They're like uncooked vegetables and dry goods and things like that, because we're giving the hungry ghosts those things and asking them to prepare and to feed them to all beings, because that's the way that our greed is unlocked, is through an offering. So we're making an offering. This goes back to the mirroring again. We're making an offering, and in making the offering, we're inviting an offering. And that's the medicine that unhooks the trap that the hungry ghosts are in the first place. Hi.
My own experience of being a hungry ghost is a little bit like what is given is not satisfying. I'm dissatisfied by how this temple does this. I'm dissatisfied by how this restaurant prepared this steak. I'm dissatisfied with how the universe, etc., etc., etc. And so I am unsatisfied, and I go on this search. How do I be more satisfied? What is going to be the better thing? How can we make it better? And there's something subtle about that I realize, which is how do we nourish the community by identifying what needs to be better, and how quickly that becomes I'm dissatisfied. And in some way, actually, I'm very satisfied by my dissatisfaction. I like being the person who wants to make things better, or this has to be better. Can you teach us a bit how to work with this kind of dance between these two kinds of ways to be dissatisfied?
Yeah. Well, one thing to notice about that karma, when we're dissatisfied, it lets us know who we are. Like the edge becomes clear, or clearer. Because I'm not now focused on what is the mutuality. I'm focused on the edge. So that's one of the things that kind of dissatisfaction can give to us. And so we become kind of like a little addicted to the solidity of my own being through being able to be dissatisfied with things. Now, having said that, certainly we don't want to make dissatisfaction an enemy in the sense that if we could just get rid of it, then everything would be fine. So this point that you're bringing up about how do we both improve things, right, and also not fall into that kind of trap of isolation, of dissatisfaction. This is simply the practice of generosity. So one way to think about okay, let's say there's something happening, we don't like the way it's happening at the temple, and we say, I wish it was done a different way. There's one way we can approach that, which is to say, I need to fix this. And so I am going to try to chiropractic the assembly. I'm going to try to chiropractic the thing myself, because I'm the only one who can see it. And I see it clearly. There's another thing we can do, which is to generously offer what it is that we see. And generously offering what it is that we can see is an unbelievably difficult and courageous thing to do. Not to have constructed the whole argument about how I am right and that I will then chiropractic the world into that way that I am right, but to offer myself and my limited viewpoint as relevant and important and fallible. That's a very different thing. So on an individual level, I think that's where the focus is. How am I generous with those difficult things as well as with the nourishment that seems, it's much easier to give some cupcakes, and then it becomes the responsibility of the community to receive those gifts, and that's a way in which there's development over time. And I would say that, of course, never would happen at Budai Temple, but sometimes that offering has to be kind of loud, because if the community is not hearing it, if the leadership in the community is not hearing it, then the offering is not just retracted, but to make the offering means to offer even more deeply our heart of concern